Hello and welcome. As usual, we'll give folks a minute or so to join us if they're doing so online. Welcome to all those who have come in person. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to see a big crowd here. I'm looking forward to hearing from folks. We'll get started in just a moment. I now call this board workshop of the South Whidbey School Board to order. Thank you all for joining us again. We've got, I don't know, about a dozen people here in person and 5 folks on the Zoom call. So wonderful to see everyone engaged. We will start tonight with our land acknowledgement. I will turn it over to Director Greenherron for that.
Thank you. In this meeting where land is on the agenda, we'll begin by this following acknowledgement. South Whidbey School District would like to begin by acknowledging that we gather on the ancestral homelands, originally known as Chukolche and Lushootseed, of the coastal Salish peoples, on the lands of the lower Skagit, Tulalip, Swinomish, Snohomish, Stillaguamish, and Suquamish, who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin since time immemorial and have hunted, fished, gathered, and taken care of these lands. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and we honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude to the Indigenous people of this territory and for their enduring care and protection of the land in which we currently occupy and share through the Treaty of Point Elliott, signed by 82 tribes and Mukilteo on January 22nd, 1855.
Thank you, Director Greenherron. Since there are a lot of folks here who do not regularly attend our school board meetings, I'll go over our public comment protocol briefly. This is a board workshop. These are our opportunity to engage in discussion with the community. These are my favorite types of meetings because I love that opportunity to have a back and forth with the community members who attend, either in person or via Zoom. I will note that public comment will be restrained and kept within our professional communications policy, which means that if we have a disagreement, we attack facts, we do not attack people. We respect the dignity of both the speakers and the listeners. You can see further information in our policy 0002, I believe it is, if you would like to look it up. But we'll step in if anything gets out of hand. I don't imagine it will, but just wanted to note that for folks. If you are on the Zoom call and would like to chime in, please use the Q&A function to note your name and location. Just general location is fine. Langley, Clinton, whatever it might be. Enter that on its own so we know you want to say something, and then start typing up your comment. That will let me pause the meeting briefly so we can get that comment in and I can read it. If you are commenting on Zoom, please comment in complete thoughts rather than just I agree, because it's entirely likely that by the time I notice the comment, we'll be beyond what you're agreeing with, and we'd like to let it be known what you're agreeing with. If you're in person and you would like to say something, please just raise a hand, get our attention somehow. Pause for a moment while we get you a mic, because we want the people who are online to be able to hear you and the people who are watching the video later on. And then note your name and location again, just the first time you speak, and then say what you want to say, and we'll have our discussion. I will remind folks that the public comment is at a board workshop is on the current item of the agenda. So if we're talking about the Port of South Whidbey presentation, it's not the time for discussion of the policy item that's on our discussion tonight, and vice versa. So please keep it to the agenda item currently being discussed. With that in mind, I will turn it over to Dr. Moshe to introduce our first agenda item.
Thank you. Just as a point of history, this school board, the members of the school board at the time, and the port had conversation several years ago, I think, regarding the expansion potentially of the um, concession stands and the need at that time for potentially some parking across Dalton Lane on district land. The board at the time indicated that it didn't have interest. Our school board in the past has indicated that the sale of land is not something they have been interested in. Since that time, the school board is also very acutely aware of housing issues in South Whidbey. And so certainly wants to be at the table in those conversations. In the last several months, I did have the occasion to have conversation with Kurt Gordon. And we talked about this issue, if Christy would bring it up, of as the port was doing its investigation, it recognized that it actually is operating on district-owned property. And so that became another issue and point of discussion. So I'm anticipating that the port here tonight is going to have conversation with the board about the issue of potentially looking at feasibility for any kind of housing as well as this land issue. And there are other organizations with similar interests. So this is the beginning of what I anticipate the board will have many discussions about. So I'm not sure who from the port wants to talk about where we are and the port's interest in talking to the school board.
Push to talk. You hear me now?
Yep.
How are you guys doing? Good. Hey,
We do some intros. I'm sorry, Kurt, because there's
Sorry.
probably a whole
Lot of-
slew of
that
people
don't
you
know.
brought with you.
Oh, you mean introduce the port? Okay, well, I'm Kurt Gordon. Greg Easton's here. Greg is the president of the commission this year, and Jack Ing's here. Jack's our Freeland commissioner. Angie Mosier is our executive director. I don't need that many
No,
other
that's,
people in
thank
the room,
you.
but I'm sure you guys do. Yes, so back, I don't know. I don't remember whether it was the CARES Act or one of the federal acts that came down through post-COVID, and there was funding for different forms of housing, mostly affordable housing. One of the things that was made available at the county level was some funding to actually look into feasibility of affordable housing on South Whidbey. We have been looking into our just actually restructuring or rebuilding our concessions facility. I think, I don't know this for sure, but I think it was built in the 40s, and it's got some issues. We did a lot to kind of prop it back up this year, and it worked out all right, but it's not going to last. And so we also are very aware, and I think as you are, we've had these conversations that we all on South Whidbey have a major problem in that there is no workforce here, and that has a direct effect on economic viability. And without going deep into what a port district does, pretty much economic development, and if in fact, to me, if there is plenty of economic development, or at least a good amount, it's economic viability. In other words, we have a lot of great businesses on South Whidbey, and a lot of people actually we have the ability to serve a lot of people, but what we don't have is employees. So you see certain facilities and certain businesses that aren't even open 7 days a week where they used to be. There are construction companies that are having difficulty hiring people, and there's I'm sure it rolls all the way down into the retail stores. But the point is, we did an economic study, and it showed that the district is aging out quickly. I could bring you more data, and I think I did when I came in here about a year and a half ago and was asking about parking. I think I brought a slide or two, but
I believe so. We've also been studying the demographics of South Woodbury pretty intensely for
yeah, I bet you have.
enrollment purposes.
Yeah, yeah. So there aren't a lot of logical places to provide for workforce housing, workforce being sort of a specific earning category. And it used to be 80 to 120%. And now the window is kind of thrown open a little bit, even at the state legislative level. But the idea is, in an area, if you could have what we would consider a regular job, and that could you pay for your rent? And so we have an idea. We worked with the Housing Authority of Island County, actually, and they had an idea as well. Workforce housing here may be for people that are 60% of we call 80 area median income. It could be as low as 60% and still actually fit, where you could have a job at the Star Store, you could have a job at China City or whatever, and you could actually afford an apartment and you could stay here. So that being said, that's a lot of background. We need to solve the problem of our boundary encroachment, but we went into our feasibility study assuming that that was on our property and looking at rebuilding a double structure that would provide for both the concession stands and maybe 10 to 15 or 18, we didn't know, apartments that would, and just to be specific here, port districts can't provide housing just for the sake of housing. Everything port districts do is scrutinized, and in order to get past the law and the statutes that dictate what we do, we can't provide for anything that isn't economically driven. So we can't provide low-income housing or homeless housing, or whatever we do has to be focused on, in our minds, economic viability. And we have to prove that out. And we've actually gone down that road a little bit with legal to make sure that what we're doing is legal. All right, so fast forward, Island County granted us some funding. I told you all that probably the last time I was here. The initial funding was $150,000 to do feasibility. And part of what we did, obviously, was surveyed the property and figured out what was where and what isn't. We also started putting together some designs, and we actually funded a potential zoning sort of change or potential zoning wording that would allow for changes in the zoning of the fairgrounds area to allow for housing. And we were actually paying the planning department of the city of Langley. Everybody's out of money. And so fortunately we had this funding from the Island County Commissioners, and we still have that funding in place. But then we found, these new twists. We also have designed a couple of different iterations of what our housing might look like. It probably caught your attention because there was a lot of publicity around that, and we were just asked by the city to provide examples. So we've provided different examples. They weren't necessarily what was going to be built, but their design review board, or what's it called, the PAB, the planning advice, needed some kind of example so they knew what they would be trying to approve or not approve. So we've gone down this road. We figured out we're on school district property, and we sort of decided to stop and had a conversation with Dr. Moshe, and a couple of staff and one of your members. And we decided to come back here for two reasons. One, we need to start to solve the problem with this boundary line regardless of housing, just because it's been explained to us by the planning director of the city of Langley that any real substantial development or repair of those food booths would require us to scoot them back over onto our property. And they have a line of substantial development that if we cross that line, then all of a sudden we gotta like tear them down and move them, put them on our property. We can buy time like we did this year, but we probably put $80-some thousand into propping them up. And we'll try and keep doing this. Nothing has to happen tomorrow, but we really need to solve the property line issue. And we want to have a discussion with you all about potentially taking the same funding that the Island County Commissioners had given us and looking into whether or not possibly part of your school district property could be leased for a long period of time for some kind of workforce or affordable housing as well. And the suggestion that we want to make is that we have this funding. We want to go back to the Island County Commissioners and let them know what we're doing with it. We wanted to come to you first and say, look, if we could straighten out the property lines and set aside X amount of feet of property, are you even slightly interested if the Port District sort of ran the project and tried to find the funding with the Housing Authority of Island County? Would that be something you'd be open to? I mean, we discussed several things when we sat, Dr. Moshe and I sat. I mean, there could be 10 or 15 units, and there 2 or 3 of them might be school district specific, where you all had them for your staff, set aside for maybe new staff or possibly part of your maintenance staff or whatever. We're all encountering problems keeping our workforce. And so, you know, we threw the idea open that if enough of them were built, the Housing Authority would run these. The Port would not run them. The school district wouldn't run them. The Housing Authority has stated a couple times now, and I've been in contact with their ED quite recently, they'd be really excited to manage this project if we can get it built. So I probably said a lot more than maybe than you wanted me to say, trying to get some background here, but we're here to do 2 things. Try and start conversations about how to solve the boundary line issue and our encroachment. And the other is to see if there's an interest in allowing us to go back to the city and find out how difficult it would be for residential use to be, or for the southern edge of your property to have some residential use.
So Kurt, one of the things that, just sticking with property encroachment, we know 2 things, one thing at least. We know that there is no such thing as thank you, adverse possession, because we're both public entities. We also know that as public entities, neither one of us can take, well, certainly the school district, because it's our problem in that the district owns the land, but it's the Port's problem that you're encroaching, to be perfectly blunt. So for the school district, there certainly can't be a cost. And one of the things that we both would have to do is get legal counsel on what does it mean and what's the exchange? Can it be just an exchange where we say, again, the board would have to make the decision, but has to be an investigation on, can the board simply say, okay, you've used it this long, we'll change the boundary? Does there have to be the exchange of money? So those kinds of things around the boundary encroachment would have to be investigated, and I suspect not at the expense of the school district. So that's the encroachment issue. The housing issue is a whole other conversation.
I think a couple of questions that I have around the encroachment is my instinct, and I know we would get legal counsel on this and we would obviously defer to those experts, but I feel like the just giving of the land or just saying you've been there this long, here, you can have it, that would be a gift of public funds. And we would not
Well,
be able.
again, that it's a public entity to a public entity. So
Yeah.
there's a difference there, which is why we would need counsel on that.
But that would be the first thing that I would look at is what were the funds that were used to purchase that land at the point in time that we purchased it, all of those pieces. Do we have any estimate on what the value of the land is? Okay.
We've done nothing to spend any district dollars on this issue.
Okay. Yeah. So I would have a wonder about what is the value of the land as well as we consider that conversation.
First of all, thank you for coming to talk to us about this. I know it's sometimes a little odd to have these conversations in front of an audience, but it's important to have that transparency with the public. And I know you all know that as well. I'm just, so again, thank you for bringing it up. I do see these as two separate issues for myself, at least, very much so. I don't have any interest in taking that land away from the, or taking that land back from the Port District, but I do agree that we need to make sure that everything's done legally and fairly between the two entities. So as far as the encroachment, that's my thought. The larger lease of property is a larger conversation for me that I think is going to take more time. But I'm happy to engage in that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we're just here to kind of let you guys understand what's going on. And this is nothing new for the state, for government entity to giving land to or sell for $1. It's the same thing we bought it from the county for $1, you know. So, and, you know, like, for example, Sunnyside, Port of Sunnyside is, you know, the port is a economic engines, you know. So like Port of Sunnyside bought a 05 department for $5,000 because it was 05 station sit there for no use. It's, you know, it takes a lot more money to fix it up. So, you know, instead, do what they had to do, they basically sell it for like whatever it costs for Port of Sunnyside. Then Port of Sunnyside turning it into a winery for helping local small winery incubate it. So just economic, you know, build up. And also they did a water station, same thing, that turned into a brewery. And so it's nothing new in the States. It's, you know, so just keep that in mind. And we only want to try to help the community, do good thing for the community. And also, as you can see, the pole building, which is kind of like a little highline towards the end. If we had to move the building back, it's going to be really tight for, you know, the 100-year they claim for the parade, the fire truck turning around, couldn't do it. And, you know, some people can't think outside the box and, you know, they want to stay as exactly what they want to be. They don't want to be anymore losing 2 inches is kind of losing 10 feet to them. So, and, you know, we like to, you know, if we can keep it, it'd be great. And, you know, open mind, if we can help to, the reason we want to do the housing, because there's no grant money to build the food stand. And, but there's grant money for workforce housing. That's kind of we're looking. And we look at it as this opportunity we can build above the air. We try not to take space from the ground. We just try to build above the air. And so that, you know, good thing we can get grant money to build the food stand and also build a housing above to help the community as community need. And also it's a great location because it has water and sewage and the bus line there in this, you know, I mean, people say, why don't you go out there in Freeland or Bayviews and all that? But there's no infrastructures, there's no sewer system, there's no water. It costs too much to build. That's why, for example, the one in Freeland across from Whidbey Island Bank, that apartment unions, it cost them almost $350,000 to build it like 10 years ago. Today, would it cost them $500,000 just to build one single unit. So it just doesn't pencil out. So, and that's kind of what we look at, you know, there's an opportunity there. We're not trying to turn the whole fairground to housing. We just look at like, hey, there's opportunity above the air we can build, and also there's grant money. So we kind of want you guys to understand it, and maybe you can help when
So
you,
which is the priority? Is the priority then to be able to fix the concession stands, but do it because you can build housing above it? Or is the priority to develop workforce housing?
I don't think we're choosing. I think it's absolutely critical to do both. And the concession stand won't fall down this year. We'll probably get through next year and maybe the next year. We got to plan a little farther out than that. We owe it to the public, as our mandate says, to try and provide economic viability. And this is the biggest emergency we have out there. And most folks don't probably look at it as an emergency, but we're losing our workforce, and pretty soon it won't be a comfortable retail community anymore. There just won't be enough people. Everybody will have to come from somewhere else. It will look and feel different than it does today. It's a fair question. I didn't mean to be avoiding it. We don't have to fix the food boost tomorrow. We need to have a 5-year and a 10-year plan, and we got to figure out how to solve that. And Jack's right. There is some funding, recreation funding, but very little. And to remake what's there, it would be easier if there was another structure, and it would there'd be a cost benefit. Okay, so however, I think we're open to whatever. We all know we need workforce housing, and so I don't think it's really an either or. I probably didn't really do a good job of describing what we're here to ask. One is to ask for discussion about the boundary line. The other is simple permission for us to pay the city planners to look in the possibility of residential being placed on your property.
So I was here at the meeting when you came before, and I guess my concern is that I'm not seeing many more details than what was presented before. If you want me to engage in a conversation around am I interested as one of 5 in giving permission or in entertaining, I'm giving you the information I need to know. I need to know what is the value of the land. I need to know what would be the port's offer to the district on the purchase of that land, if that's what you want to know. I want to know how much square footage and what is the value of that? What would a lease term look like? So I can have a conversation around those discussions when I have those details.
I guess my question was sort of precedes that, in that my question is, we don't really know what it would take based on your public use property or the city to what they'd have to do to allow residential to be built there. And all I'm saying is, for now, as opposed to any specifics, would it be inappropriate for the port to spend the dollars that we get from Island County to at least investigate that with the city of Langley? That's a question we have.
Let me interject something real quick. We've got a couple of comments from online, but before I can read them, I need to know first name and last name from each of the commenters and your location. I've got the first name and location for one of them, but I need the last name also. And from the anonymous attendee, I do need name and location before I read the comments.
I think we're getting convoluted. I just want to be really clear that it's 2 issues. So the school board, and the school board knows this, I'm just saying this for other folks in the room, the school board would need to direct the superintendent to work on this boundary issue. And again, I'm reminding the school board that the use of school district funds for the feasibility of the port to take back, or not to take back, for the district to provide the port with the land, whether or not it's $1 and it's easy to do and it's public entity to public entity, it doesn't seem that the district should be paying anything for that work. Because the district owns the land. The district has no interest in giving up the land. The port has an interest in keeping the land that it's been using. So I would suggest, and it's up to the board, that the board provide some direction to the port to say, if you want this land, do the investigating and bring back what it would take from your legal counsel. Of course, we'd have to verify it, but that's not what we're going to spend the education dollars on. That's the first piece of the puzzle. The second piece of the puzzle, which we did talk about, was there's money there for feasibility. And what the school board also knows is that there are other entities that are also interested. There are lots of people that are interested, and I say people, I mean entities, in school district land. And this board and other boards before it have made it very clear they have no interest in getting rid of capital. But should there be an opportunity to lease land that benefits the district, that the district gains some benefit from economically or workforce or however that's driven, separate issue. And I think, and I can see it from the comments coming in from the public, and we haven't heard from the people in the room, these things are getting conflated. And so I think I would ask that the board deal with one thing at a time.
I was just going to suggest that we focus on the property line as it is right now for discussion immediately, and then move on to the second point after that. And when we get to the second point, I will read these comments because I do have names for them now, but they address that more than the property line. So I'd like to focus us on the property line first, see if we can work through that. Thank you, Dr. Moshe, for the summation of what the board has said on this topic in past, particularly I think it was 2 years ago when you came last to present. So I'd like to focus on that. So if there are people in the room or online who would like to comment on that first item, the boundary line item, let's do that first. Let's get you a mic. Yeah, you do. Go for it. And then pass the mic back, please.
Yes, I think it's appropriate for us as a port, as part of our feasibility analysis, to do the work necessary to identify what the legal issues are and what kind of consideration is required. So I think we can commit to undertaking that work. And then beyond that, looking at use of other property, we can again do research on how much land it might be required, what kind of values are involved, what kind of fair compensation would be. We could come up with numbers like that and bring it back to you. And again, do that as our responsibility.
Excellent. Thank you.
I guess, we're here just to basically see if you guys open mind to entertain that what we bring it up. And of course, if you guys entertain, of course, we had to go get appraisal, commercial real estate appraisals and all that stuff. And we'd be happy to, like Kirk said, we got the grant money to do the physical, so there's a study, sorry. And, we're not going to expect the school put up the school public funding to do the steps, so.
Excellent. Could you pass that back to Gwendy, please?
Yikes. All right. Quick question, just for some clarification. Just to get it back on the appropriate boundary lines, how much space are we talking? Because I know, I think one of the biggest concerns for the school district is that's the parking y'all use every year for a huge fundraiser. So I'm just wondering, just to figure out the boundary line.
The property boundary issue is actually all perceived to be the fairgrounds. We're not even talking about across the road for parking.
So can I just maybe get my question answered? How much are we talking just to get to the appropriate property line? Are we talking for the school district? I can see a drawing, but does anyone know from the port how much we're talking as far as?
So my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that if we, or however we agree to resolve this, it's not taking any further land away from school, what the school can use currently, because what's being discussed is already being used by the fairgrounds, correct?
Can I help explain this image with the microphone?
Take the mic. Hang on. Hang on. Hang on. Hang on. You need a mic. So what he's explaining is the property line is the dark line, right?
No,
No.
This dark line
that one.
is the property line.
Yes,
The dashes
yes.
are where the fairgrounds uses property of the district. So it's this up to Dalton Lane. It's here.
And on
Oh, it's about this much land.
your end, it's about 10 feet, and then clearly it diminishes.
Right. And then the other part of that is this is Dalton Lane. And last year when they came, that's when they talked about parking on the other side, which the board had no interest in. So
we
yeah,
we didn't know at that time we were encroaching
Right.
on district property.
And just as a note of why we're being so careful with the mics is because we do have a YouTube video of this meeting afterwards, and we want the people who are following along at home now or watching that later to be able to hear what's being said.
Thank you. Yeah, I
Question?
knew kind of the
Yeah.
property line is where the buildings currently are, but I know that's been a big concern about moving the property lines. A lot of people thought that meant they were losing more land in a sense. In actuality, we're just basically where the structure currently is. We would just be defining that.
Yeah.
So that's what I was clarifying.
Yeah, my understanding is that this wouldn't change anything that is in place now. It would change the lines drawn on the map under it.
And on the high side, we're basically encroaching around 10 feet-ish currently is what,
That's what it
Yeah,
sounded like to me.
that's
too.
what I was just trying to clarify. Thank
It
you.
looks like about 400 to 500 square feet based on
Uh,
the scale and my math.
the other question though, would be the setback. So if there were rebuilding to take place, there would likely be the setback.
And-
But
and-
that's kind of the
And that's all
port's
part of
issue.
the port needs to work that out because you are right, but there are also variances. So, this would take, and as Greg and Jack both said, this should be the port's responsibility to get with our legal groups and figure out what the state law says and what all the options are and come back with proposals so that you don't spend any money or have to do the work and you can just either approve or ask for another example.
Oh, can I talk now? Yeah, this is not about the boundary line issue, but my name is Doug Hofius. I live in Clinton. My wife is a school employee. I serve on the board of something called Island Roots Housing. So we're a local nonprofit doing housing development. I am an architect in Everett, and I do a lot of low-income housing projects. The school board probably has a vested interest in developing housing for some of the 90 some odd housing insecure families in your district. And we've done work in Edmond School District and in Everett School District for the school districts who are surplusing their property for the specific purpose of stabilizing housing for the kids in their district. So I've heard some comments from the board that they're wanting money for all of this, but the board should have an eye to stabilizing some of the families in their district because it's an issue in the schoolrooms, and it's something that school boards all around our region are doing now because families are unstable.
I really appreciate your comment, and I want to be clear that I do have a vested interest in this and that I am aware of the housing concerns on the island. I think what I'm hoping to convey is that we can both have a vested interest in supporting the housing needs of the island of not only our students, but our employees, and also wanting to have good information to be working from and to have a good partnership with where the work is going to take place. I think that, again, the first conversation we have to settle is the property line piece. And from there, I need to have data. I need to have information, and we've been waiting 2 years for that data and for that information. And so if you're wanting me to make an informed decision that is focused and vested in sustainable housing, I'm not opposed to that. I need to feel like we're getting good information in a timely manner that's accurate and that allows us to make informed decisions.
So I'd like to focus, thank you for the comments both and for addressing that. I'd like to focus on the boundary issue first and see if there's any more comment or discussion on that issue, because it currently sounds like the port is quite willing to start the process of start and pay for the process of figuring out what needs to happen. And then we can work together to find an equitable agreement there with that. Yes? Yes.
Yeah.
To see if there is an equitable agreement to be had. Thank you. Yes.
I mean, the whole point is we're here to get you guys blessed to move forward. If you guys want us to get you the data, we're happy to. But we're not on the point for us to do any data without you guys' permission first. So if you guys go back and make your own decision, let the port does the study and give you the data, we'd be happy to.
To be clear, we're just talking about the boundary line right now. And I think you've summarized where we're at. And the only addition I would add is, while researching what to do to resolve the boundary line, if there are multiple avenues of resolution, it would be great to know them all, or at least some of them, so the board can decide from amongst them and understanding the pros and cons of each.
Okay. So it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong with this summary, I'll re-summarize just because it sounds like we're at the end of this part of this agenda point, that we would love to get the details and facts on the boundary issue, what would need to happen to resolve that. And then we can begin discussions to see if there's an equitable way to resolve it between, yes.
Well, and I also just want to come back to Dr. Moshe's point that we would vet this through our own legal counsel, and we would not expect to cover the cost of that vetting.
Okay. So
If the board is determining that you want the superintendent to follow through, I would wait for the port's information. Once I received it, I would run it by council, and then bring it back to the board at that time.
does that seem like a reasonable summation from what you've heard here as well?
That's my understanding. I think that's a reasonable way for the port to proceed.
Okay, excellent. Then we can set aside the first issue and move on to the discussion of housing in the area. Yeah. Let's get you a mic. Yes.
Hi, I'm Ben Criswell. I live in Freeland. So the resolution to the boundary line issue is a very, very simple one. I'm sure you guys are aware of how it works, but a boundary line adjustment, I do them all the time. Very straightforward. I know it's a public entity to a public entity, and certainly the legal side of things is going to be also fairly straightforward, I'm assuming. My question is kind of for the port. Were you guys hoping for a hybrid approach to the boundary line adjustment to also include the ability of future development, or is it, let's get the boundary? And I should say, I want to commend the port. This is not their problem, right? So they were handed this encroachment and they're now looking to deal with it. And I think that's fantastic. My biggest question is it a hybrid approach where it's let's resolve the boundary line adjustment, and which will enable us to move forward with the city of Langley on the feasibility portion of building this hybrid structure of new vending and multifamily in that location? Or is it the intent, let's resolve the encroachment and then let's talk about adjacent property, or is it still a fairground property? And I think clarity on that would be helpful, not only for everybody in the audience, but for the board as well.
Take that?
Certainly from the board's perspective, yeah.
Yeah, it's on, right? Yeah, Bennett, I think there's going to be two separate discussions, and we need to get going down the road to solve the boundary line issue and the encroachment period with nothing in a format that has nothing to do with a change of zoning or use. And then the second question we're here for tonight is to ask if the Port District can continue with the City of Langley's planning department to see if there is reasonable, if it's reasonable at all to allow for residential on school district property. That would be a completely separate question tonight and a separate process. So I think these are two separate things, and we need to attack this boundary line adjustment and figure out with the city whether they'd waive the setback, how much room we need, what the values are, whether in fact you can exchange it for $1. All those are up in the air, and the port needs to get going on that. And at the same time, the only other thing we're asking for tonight is can we move forward while the city is drafting legal changes for residential use on public property? Can we include part of the school district? That's the second question. So I answered both because he was asking about both. So I know you want to stay focused on the boundary line.
No, I think that both the question and the answer are an admirable transition from one to the other. So we'll now start discussion or continue discussion about the permission that you're looking for, correct me if I'm summing this up wrong, to begin studies to change zoning and provide development in what? Yes. Yes. Yes, to allow the port to fund the study to see if it's doable.
So again, I want to make sure that I'm clear because there are many entities doing housing. So is this only for the port? Or would it be feasibility to build regardless of who the district decided to?
It
work
would,
with?
as I understand it, it wouldn't be only for the port. This is actually the planning department trying to figure out what they'd have to do to make changes to allow residential on these public properties or to change them. We have a little more of an overlay than the school district does. So we have a slightly different planning sort of situation than the school district does. But while we're there, we could go ahead and work on that for your benefit. And if it turns out that it's somebody other than us, personally, I don't care who builds it. Let's just talk about whether it's even possible.
I do have a couple of comments from online that I'd like to read because they've been sitting here for a while until we got to this part of it. Paul Serda from Langley. All due respect, but the port should not be taking public lands for private housing. As a neighbor of the fairgrounds, I can attest to the port's unwillingness to be a good neighbor, and their interest last year in closing the fairgrounds to the public is of great concern. We should incentivize private businesses to invest in affordable housing rather than allowing the port into the housing business. Thank you for sharing the opinion on this. I don't know if, I don't know that that needs to be addressed. I think that's a valid opinion and something that is good to hear, but I'd like to see, that's certainly something to weigh in as we're making a decision on whether or not to get involved with this.
Brooke, you know that affordable and workforce housing won't be able to be built by private citizens because it's not going to be doable. I mean, I shouldn't have said but it's our opinion that unless you find capital funding outside of the project, these kinds of projects just don't pencil out. We've had building specialists here on South Whidbey looking at different projects and they just don't work. So the only way we're going to get, in my opinion, I think my commissioners agree with me. Any kind of workforce housing, especially so locked in long-term, is going to be with some kind of capital investment from the community.
I think it's certainly going to, it's my opinion, that it's certainly going to take a larger entity than a private person in general. Yeah.
I was at the chamber meeting in Langley this morning, and the featured presentation was a presentation around the 10-year comprehensive plan. And I am by no means an expert, and I know that housing has layers upon layers upon layers of, involvement regionally, county, state, city of Langley. How does the work that you're putting in and your plan to investigate whether housing would work where you'd like to put it, how does that cross-pollinate with that 10-year comprehensive plan? And does it fit in with the values that are being aggregated that say what kind of housing at which income points people need housing? So that would be a question I would have.
So I'd like to let Greg Easton answer part of this, because there's going to be new requirements that in the cities and in the counties of there's a certain percentage of homes that need to be allowed for, and a percentage of that has to be affordable. And I don't know the details. He probably does. He's also on.
I am on the PAB for Langley. I've recused myself from any discussion of the rezoning of the fairgrounds and the overlay, but I am involved in the comprehensive plan process. And the city of Langley has agreed to an allocation of housing units countywide, and an allocation of housing units across income levels. And over the next 20-some years, the city of Langley will be seeking to accommodate 446 new housing units, and over a third of those would require subsidy. So they would require, that would be workforce housing, affordable housing, housing that will require something beyond what the private market is willing to provide.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Just to clarify, I want to make sure I have the proper terminology. Affordable housing in this case is not just a relative term. It's not rhetorical. There are actual numbers attached to different styles and types of housing. So just maybe a little comment about that for folks who maybe don't know, and speak of affordable housing as a big umbrella rather than a set of standards and percentages.
Yeah, generally, you just think of housing is, you define it as being affordable at a particular income level. And so, as Kurt mentioned earlier, workforce housing is generally considered to be housing affordable to households making 80 to 120% of the area median income. And so what the required process for comprehensive planning at the city level and also at the county level identified a number of housing units required from 50 to 80%, 80 to 120% and above. And also at the lowest income levels, have to identify the number of units for permanent supportive housing as well as non-permanent supportive housing. So permanent supportive housing involves a whole series of social services as well as simply shelter. So all of that is defined. Those are levels that have to be planned for in the comprehensive plan, and a comprehensive plan is being studied and will be adopted at the end of calendar year 2025.
And just to follow up on that, what I was going to say, this helps them solve that problem.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for the clarification. I just wanted to clarify that phrase, that vocabulary word, and also, just my curiosity moving forward as when and if any research gets done on that particular piece of property. my question might be, what would be the best type of housing for that? Because another thing I heard this morning was that multi-tiered social services, embedded housing, is most often seen in urban areas and is most often seen in a mid to high-rise building, which is really not in my opinion, not a possibility on Whidbey. And so I would be interested to know in the future if there would be consideration around what type of housing is the best type of housing if that space ends up being utilitarian for any kind of housing.
And just remember, the port cannot invest in anything but workforce housing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to point out what I think I'm seeing a bit of like a chicken and egg problem. What I'm hearing from y'all is that you want some assurance that if you spend some of your precious resources, no,
No.
you don't want
I just want permission.
permission.
Don't need assurance that anything will happen. What we're interested in investigating is whether it's even possible,
Okay.
so we can have a better discussion.
And how does the board, as a single voice, go about doing something like this? Granting
Well,
permission. is-
basically, they're asking to be on our land to do a feasibility study.
Right. And that's why I'm saying there's the chicken and egg, because as Director Downs pointed out, we don't know what the plan is. So we can't say, this looks good, do more research, or no.
Well,
We don't wanna do
basically,
this.
again, I'll just clarify, the land we're talking about is what is known as the old football field at the community center. And the baseball field too, anywhere in that area along Dalton is what we were talking about. Again, the land that is being discussed is in the city of Langley. So it is what is known as the community center and the land surrounding it. That's what we talked about as what the port indicated interest in expanding their feasibility off just the fairgrounds property to adjacent property owned by the school district.
Thank you. And the last time you were here, what I believe happened was we heard a similar ask, and if I recall correctly, and I apologize if I'm putting words in my colleagues' mouths, is we seem interested. Please come back with more information.
Well, again, just to clarify, what the port came with last time was we want to build this structure, and in order to have enough parking, the city of Langley wants the board of directors to grant permission to use the land on Dalton.
Okay, you're right. That is a big difference. Thank you.
Yeah, this is about, is it feasible to build housing structures of some sort? That we have money to do this, speaking for the port, they have money to do this feasibility study. They're working on the feasibility on the fairgrounds. Can they expand that feasibility study to include adjacent land owned by the district? Again, it seems to me that permission, it's basically, can I walk on your land with a surveyor and see if it's even reasonable to build here? A feasibility study is just that. They get folks to walk around and do whatever it is that they do to determine if building on that property for 15 units or 5 units, or it's not possible, or there's not enough septic, or you'd need to improve septic. That's what they're asking for permission to do. That report becomes public. And again, no obligation by the district to take it on at all. It could be,
Right.
great, thanks for the information. We're going to go do it ourselves or whatever.
Or not do it at
Hearing
all.
us-
Not do it at all, or
whatever.
no thank
Or
you,
Absolutely
or,
do exactly what you're.
Hearing you
or
say
it's,
this,
it's feasible, but it's $250,000 and it's the landowner's job. And you say,
Yeah.
no, thank you, we don't want
Hearing-
to spend money.
hearing you say this, I think this might not even be a board decision. The board directed the superintendent to make I don't remember the exact wordings, but it was specifically one of the goals, make the best use of district resources. And so this could be within that, and that could
Could
be
be,
an
but
operational
this is a
decision.
big deal. You can see by the number of people in the room that there's a whole lot of interest around housing, around what the port's doing, around how it impacts the fairgrounds. What's the school district's responsibility? Are you going to come to the table how's the housing? So I think, yes, to answer you, Joe, the superintendent could have said, sure, Kurt. But I don't think that would have been in the superintendent's best interest.
Okay, fair enough. So back to my original question. How does the board agree or disagree to give permission to the board?
So my suggestion would be in discussion here, and I know we have two people who still want to talk, and one comment here and a third here. My suggestion would be, at the end of this discussion, the board inform me whether they would like to see a agenda item at our next business meeting giving approval to do this. That would be my suggestion to the board on
Okay,
this.
great. Then in that case, I'd like to hear from the
Yeah.
community.
Okay.
Just a little bit of background. We've done some work on this professionally outside this district, but RCWs allow school districts to surplus property to nonprofit entities providing affordable housing. Affordable housing per state code means housing for families earning 80% of AMI and under. So this is long-term. You're just talking about feasibility now, but long-term discussion, there are a couple possibilities. If you're talking about other types of housing, there's probably money transactions, but surplusing is an option for low-income and affordable housing built by nonprofits.
Thank you for sharing that expertise. Yeah.
Charlene Davenport, Clinton, and we need more affordable housing. There's no question about that. But my question is, and I think maybe young people might be interested in this, is what is the impact to the Whidbey Island water table to support more housing? We have areas on this island where you cannot build because the water table will not support it. So is that going to be part of the feasibility study? And these young people are going to be interested in trying to make sure that our environment is not damaged anymore.
Every time I hear that nearly 500 new housing units in Langley structure, it always makes me blink. But that's what the county says needs to happen here. But yeah.
Hi, my name's Carl Cheney. I live in Freeland. I'm a member of the Fair Association and a vendor at the fair every year. There's 3 board members here with me and the fair manager. In the interlocal agreement that the port signed when they got the property from the county, it specifically mentions the Fair Association and the 4-H. And we'd formally ask the school board to include us in any discussions along with the port, because we do have an interest in what happens at the fair. There is no doubt we need housing here. When I moved to the island 4 years ago, I lived in a basement apartment next to the Navy's practice field. I was happy to get it at $1,200 a month. So it is important. We have some concerns about the fairgrounds that we would like to express if this goes forward to the board, but we just want to be included in those discussions if we can. And one of my other major issues about the workforce housing built on the fairgrounds, which would change the whole makeup of the fair, there's no guarantee that if we build workforce housing, that those people will actually work here on the south end of the island. We can't require them to live here, so we could end up with Boeing employees from the other side and no benefit for the people here. And I don't think we can even legally put that requirement in. So I'm trying to figure out how we get a benefit out of that. So, and as the discussions proceed, I really would like to discuss specifically the housing on the fairgrounds, because I have a whole list of things that come up. And I don't want to be at odds with the port because I like these guys actually, but it will affect economically the fairgrounds, because as you take more space from it, it affects the fairgoers' experience. It affects the money. And as a vendor, I'm kind of partial to my money. And so again, I would just would request that we are involved in this conversation so we can express our views too and come to an equitable agreement for the entire community.
As a parent of a 4-H'er, I second this, and I would want to involve 4-H as well. They have a deep connection to the fairgrounds.
We'll get to you in just, I want to read one online comment that's been waiting for a while and then it moves to you. Megan Williams Clinton, is it possible to work with the Fair Board and Association to get possible grant money for the concession stands? The fair is a 501c3 and can get grants that the port cannot. Just a thought. Just something else to add into that discussion and conversation. And I've got one more here. Just a second. I'm moving through this. Jason Kalk, Clinton, can the port or the housing authority promise dedicated units for district employees in public granted workforce housing? I don't think that there can be a requirement for district employees, but I'm not sure on that.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. You know more about it than I do.
Well, you certainly can allot units, but the bigger issue is what the district wants to do. The district, especially as we approach being under 1,000 students, if that were to happen, there's a lot more leeway for what a district can do for workforce housing. I think we're getting the cart ahead of the horse on that, though.
Yeah, and the other thing, kind of respond to both, is the housing authority would take this on. They have several projects in Island County, and they have Island County residents in those projects, and they give vouchers and they do whatever management they have to do. And if you outgrow, if your income outgrows, then you need to go. So I don't manage that, and I don't pretend to want to start to. Trying to build something that would be manageable within the systems that already exist here in Island County. And the Housing Authority's been doing this for years.
So I just have 3 things that I've been jotting down. First off, I want to summarize and say we actually have 3 issues on the table. We have the issue of the property line encroachment. We have the issue of the original ask, which was up to Dalton. And we have a third issue of the field. So I just want to be clear for everyone, there's actually 3 asks on the table. Correct?
I think that the parking spaces was something you asked 2 years ago, and you're not looking at that right now. No.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
just looking at us signing off on them getting,
Okay.
providing the money
Then
for a
also
feasibility
looking at the
study.
football field.
Yeah.
Yeah. See,
Yeah.
Your land, if you look at this picture, right, there's wetlands
'Cause
there,
We have the-
there's septic there, there's encroachment issues. The feasibility isn't guaranteed.
Mhm. And I want to go back to when we first established the community center, and, the board has changed, and so perhaps the opinions have changed as well. But I remember Island Shakespeare Festival coming to us and wanting to put a permanent platform out in the back part of the field. And the board at the time said no, because we couldn't return the space back to the original intended use. And so I just want to be clear that the board's precedence has been that if we're leasing land out to other agencies, that it has to be able to be returned back. And so this would be a very big delineation from that. I would also say, I'm seeing the board is meeting with us because they would like to find a way to get us to yes. And I just want to share that part of getting me to a yes is ensuring that this plan, the partners that you're bringing on board in managing the plan, are in alignment with the values of the district. And so if you are considering management organizations or who's going to be running this, I would really encourage you, if you would like to move us to a place of yes, to ensure that those agencies and those organizations are in alignment with the district's values. And that includes climate sustainability, that includes equity, diversity, recognizing persons, and not just necessarily espousing that, but also modeling that within the community. So that's some information for you of how to get me to a yes. Do with it what you will. But those are just some thoughts that I have.
Well, I want to thank everybody for having the opportunity to come here and speak. I am a member of the Fair Board, but involved mostly with the log show. But at this particular meeting, I think the position that I'm speaking most from the heart about is in 1963, I graduated from Langley High School. And I'm actually kind of proud of that. And I'm proud of Langley and the feel of the place. And I've heard that somebody a couple years ago said that actually some of the pictures were still hanging up and that my picture is still down there. But I haven't been back there to look. But something I'd like to bring up, 100 years ago, some people here on the island decided to do something about creating a fair. And they acquired some property and they all donated it and so forth. But this was 100 years ago, okay? If they hadn't have done that, would we even have a fair today? Probably not. Well, similar kind of things happened to create the school district and where the school is now, where the old high school is. I still don't know the right name for it. It's still the old high school to me. But nonetheless, what I would really suggest is everybody take it very seriously. Don't give up any school property. The reason being is 20 years or 40 years or 80 years from now, the school is probably going to need that property for something. But if they've given it up now, they'll never get it back. Let's think far to the future as we can. Population is growing. We're going to have more and more people, the Growth Management Act and stuff like that. You can look at all of that. Let's not cripple the school district and the schools by taking land away from them now that they're going to use or need badly in the future. So let's go Falcons.
Thank you.
Are they even Falcons
Yes,
anymore?
we are still the Falcons, the high school.
Thank you all very much.
You can pass it over. I agree. Last time this came up, one of the things that I don't remember which person up on over here said it, but was they're not making more land, particularly on an island. So it is, especially if we're talking 500 new housing units in Langley and similar but not as large expansion on other parts of the school district, we have to consider whether we're going to have to reopen that property as a school again. So it is something to keep in mind as we're deliberating all of this.
I don't even know where to start. All right. Couple concerning items. One of the first things I hear out of the school board is, what are we going to get for it? In so many words. We have a rising homeless population in our student population. That should be a huge concern. My encouragement for that would be either be part of the solution or continue to not look at the problem. As far as the fairs they did a temporary fix. It was only supposed to cost $40-some thousand, I think. It cost almost double that, and that bought them a few years worth of time. Hopefully 5 is, I think, the hope. As wonderful it is to think they can get a grant, which they've always had that possibility, and they have done that in the past on other structures and things in the fair, because I was on the school board, or excuse me, the fair board for a while. If you think of just a temporary fix being around $80,000 to rebuild all those food concessions is huge. Does it take space from the fair? Yes, but it quadruples the functionality of those food booths. It makes them safe. It makes them up to health code. But yes, they would probably have to build further in, and that would hurt it a little bit. But for the Fair Association to take that on and build it themselves with grant money, or we go to the taxpayers and say, hey, by the way, we're going to do this. Will you put more tax dollars towards that? That's our other options. So the port's not coming here, we're going to take your property. They're trying to improve the current infrastructure and address an issue in Island County that affects the school in a huge way. So I hear a lot of opposing concerns, and I understand, and this is the place for it, and that's great. This is a good conversation. But please look at the bigger picture. It's kind of like we agree and we support it, just not in our backyard. That really has no solution at the end. That just divides people. I'd really like to find a solution. Another part of the conversation that hasn't been brought up, and I don't want to rattle anyone and add one more element, but the school has a lot of bare property. And just like this gentleman said, we can use that for housing. The port isn't stuck. We must do it this way, and this is the only place we have to build, and this is what we want. They just want to start the conversation. They want to do the feasibility so they can answer your guys' questions and concerns, but they can't do that until they get a head nod of, yes, you can walk on my property and do the feasibility, and yes, you can put money in that direction. No one in the right mind, when you come into public funds, would do it without that. That would be really poor. So I guess my encouragement as a school board is to step back for a minute and look at the bigger picture, not just this is what we're going to lose. The community is gaining workforce housing. The fair is gaining those kitchens, those food booths could be used year round if they were brought up to code. They could be used around. They do the incubator kitchens right now, and they are maxed out. Small businesses use them all the time. They could use those if those food booths were brought up to code. But to think that the Fair Association, is as goodwill as they are, could do it with grants for 80,000, was only supposed to be 40,000, that would be a huge feat for them. And we want to keep that fairgrounds for the community because it's intended for the community. And I just hope everyone gets on board on this and comes up with a solution and not just put up walls. So thank you.
Can I just jump in here? So we do have a lot of land, and there's actually been discussion with a variety of groups about housing. There's 40 acres behind here that is a treed 40 acres. There's lots of land in the district, and we actually have been very much at the table talking about housing and developing housing and with the port. I think there's no closed mind here. Actually, they're quite open-minded as a board about housing and the need for housing and the need for maintaining or not adding to the carbon footprint and all of the other pieces that go along with it. So I don't think it's an accurate assessment to think folks are putting up roadblocks. I think it's a responsible board to ask the appropriate questions. But yeah, we've been in conversation. Boards directed me to be in conversation about sitting at tables and doing housing, and in fact knows that not only can we, through the RCW's surplus land, if the board was interested in that, they can also go out for a bond to build housing for staff. So there are lots of options. It's a question of making good choices, knowing that they are also owning all of this land that could be in the other direction. Should we really develop a lot of housing, we'll need to reopen some of our school buildings, which is a really good thing. So I think we're all on the same page that housing is needed, and the school district knows it's in its backyard, as opposed to not in my backyard. But it has to be something that we as a community, which is why this is on the board's agenda, believe is the right decision, because there are lots of entities trying to do good things. My question is, why is it just the port? Why not? I mean, we've got Island Roots Housing doing housing. We've got Island County Housing that you've talked about. We've got the port. We've got the district interested. It always seems like there are a bunch of little small groups trying to do the same work. And it would be nice if maybe the school district is the unifier.
There's a piece of indigenous culture that I heard a couple of years ago that has really stuck with me, and it's keeping in mind 7 generations down. So to your point of, when we have the conversation about do we sell land? Do we not? It's thinking about what is the impact 7 generations down. And there's one side of it of, yeah, you can't get it back. It doesn't make more, but that also doesn't mean that what you sell it for isn't put to good use. It also doesn't necessarily mean that if you sell the land and you build units that the island can't sustain, that the literal physical infrastructure and the physical structure of our environment can't sustain. That's not benefiting people 7 generations down. So I like to look at this from a perspective of not putting up barriers, but thinking 7 generations down.
It sounds like people have said most of what they want to say on this topic at the moment. I would like to put it to my fellow board members, and let's do it this way. If board members would like to see this on the agenda at our next meeting, send me an email and say yes, because we're not supposed to take action at workshops. So in keeping with our tradition of if a board member wants something on the agenda, it goes on the agenda. If you'd like to have this agreement to let them do a feasibility study on our land on the agenda for the business meeting, email me. If a board member does it, we'll get it on the agenda for our business meeting.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
I'd just like to clarify one thing in terms of feasibility study. I mean, at a minimum, we can look at a proposal to you for how we would use the land for parking on the north side of Dalton. Look at the feasibility for that. Look at what's legal under the city's land use code. Go beyond that and look at a broader proposal for housing. That's a little less well defined at this point. So I would just like to be clear from our point of view as how far we're going in doing our feasibility analysis, what the scope of it would be.
So then my suggestion would be if there is a motion to be made that we be explicit about the land that we're talking about, which portions of that land that we're talking about. Does that sound reasonable to the board?
I think that if the port would like me to consider this as an agenda item, I need something in writing clearly and explicitly stating what you are asking. I appreciate maps, I appreciate drawings, I need words, and I need it outlined in writing. What are you asking for?
Let's see, our next meeting is in 2 weeks. So if you could get it to us in a week. Okay. So by next Wednesday, if you could get us that, and then if you would send it to Dr. Moshe, she can share it with the board members, and then they can let me know if they'd like to see that on the agenda. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I just wanted to see if our student reps had any opinions on this.
I would totally be in support of allowing a viability survey on the turf land. One thing that Charlene brought up that I actually do think is really important is to also check the environmental feasibility of that, because as students in the school, we don't want to contribute to anything that would be harming the watershed. I know there's been a lot of work, particularly by student groups in that stream area and river area, to actually restore native plants and keep the river healthy. And I think this is an important thing to take into consideration if we are doing a viability survey there.
Excellent. Agreed very, very heartily. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll move on to our next discussion item, our next agenda. So our next agenda item is our superintendent search. And we have two particular items within that to discuss. The first of which, well, let's give a brief overview of where we are in the search first. Dr. Moshe, you want to catch us up on that?
Certainly. So the board selected a search team, Hazard Young Associates, Atia and Associates, and they met with the board. They are setting up have set up forums for various groups, and there's a public forum on the 18th, and all of that information is on our website in terms of where we are. They had two questions for the board, one question for the board. They explained that they have the survey that they typically do, which would go out to all of the community, would be open for a certain period of time. They would collect the responses and provide that information to the board. For an additional fee, they can do a much more in-depth survey, which they rarely do, but would do that if the board wanted that. They weren't necessarily recommending it. So that's a decision that we thought the board should make, but I also would ask that the board understand that this is it's moving fairly quickly. And so to empower either your board chair or the liaisons to make decisions and not have to come back to a board meeting to make every decision that they ask about.
So thank you very much. The items that, the sub items on this that I had were the student representative role in advisory votes when we come to the finalist for the superintendent, and the superintendent search survey, and as a addendum to that, what is the boundaries of what the liaisons can do without coming to the board in order to keep up with that fast pace that Dr. Moshe mentioned. So those were the three subtopics I wanted to get to. And if we have any others as part of the superintendent search, we can certainly do that.
I think I may have misunderstood when we were named liaisons. And so I just, for the record, need to say that I met with Paul as asked about the travel costs and made a recommendation to Hazard and Young of per diem plus airfare. I assumed that when we were named liaisons that we were operating in a place where we could make reasonable decisions. So if I overstepped, I apologize.
Well, and I think that that is something that we failed to set out when we discussed liaisons. So I think that that's an important point for us to discuss, that we do have guidelines. I don't think that you can overrun guidelines that haven't been set yet, but I think that we should discuss them and set them. I did promise our student representatives that we would address that point, their point first. The discussion of whether the student representatives would have an advisory vote on the final decision on the superintendent. At last meeting, we asked if you would be able to check in with any other student representatives across the state, or if you would have the opportunity to do so, to see if they have had input in that. Have you had a chance to do that?
Well, I have a couple of things to say here. I've spoken to a lot of students on this, and I can just tell you that it's very important to students that they see the student representatives voting and being active at the table, voting on this, not just off to the side. And the two issues we discussed last time, retaliation and legal issues with it. And we came to the conclusion that there weren't really legal issues. As for retaliation, like, I think the thing with that is that if a superintendent is retaliating, we chose the wrong superintendent. And I have confidence in our board. I don't think that we're going to choose the wrong superintendent. I just don't think we're going to do that. So I think going on to that, this is probably going to be one of the most influential decisions we make. It will affect, like, yeah, it's the most influential decision our board will be making in this time. And whatever we say or do, how we do it, what does that say? It will speak to students, however we say we're doing it. If we have students speaking, it will show us that we value their voice in it. And if we don't have students speaking, it will show the opposite. Like, I think I said in an earlier meeting that what we do up here and what we say all impacts the culture down at the schools, you know? And that continues to apply to this. If we say that students aren't going to be voting on this, it will impact the culture in the schools. However we say that we aren't doing it, you know? And as for, what's it called? Research on it. I did do some research. I contacted a lot of student reps. Student reps have not been around very long, and the advisory vote has been around even shorter. But we've always been a very forward and progressive school in this front. Why stop now? I think we got to keep going with it and continue to bear that name. We are proud of that fact when we go to conferences. We always are saying, we have the advisory vote, we have student reports, our students are at the table. That is something that we pride ourselves in as a school district. Why would we stop that push now here when it comes to a big decision?
Callahan, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think I agree with 100% with what Carter's like saying about student voices in the decision on who our superintendent will be. I think I should also talk to Carter before I say anything about this, but I wonder if to carry on and like consider and take into consideration the like protection of the student voice in this, we could maybe like combine our advisory vote instead of voting individually and discuss it. So then there's less like sole responsibility. And I would have to discuss that with Carter, but I think it's important to have that student voice.
So I wanted to assure you that we certainly want your voices at the table in the discussion, whatever we decide on the vote. And I understand that there's a difference between providing an opinion and having a vote that's recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to reassure you and anyone listening that we want to have y'all be integral to this process.
It's how it speaks to the community too, is my big point with it, is that we can have our opinion and all the time, you know, but then are we at the table or are we lobbyists, you know, in the grand scheme of things? Like anyone can give their opinion to you guys, and like any student can do that. But Callahan was elected, I was nominated, you know, we're the student reps here, we have a seat at the table to do that. And that speaks to the students that we have a commitment to student voices and we're following through with that, in my opinion.
Carter, you've made some very compelling points. It's obvious you did your research. And I want to reward that with giving you giving the two of you the privilege, or I don't even want to call it a privilege, but the ability to cast advisory votes in this very important decision that the board's going to make. I find that every time we're on the fence about whether we push the envelope on what we allow our student reps to do, or have or do, I feel a little uncomfortable in pushing and going where a few other boards have not gone yet. But every time we do it, I feel in retrospect we've made the right decision, because the two of you and your predecessors have shown maturity and wisdom far beyond what I wrongly would expect from students. And so my inclination is that you've made a very compelling point. And assuming that you're correct, that there are no like absolute legal lines that would get us as a board in trouble, I'm inclined to agree with your position.
I am curious, you said that there weren't any legal ramifications on that. Is that something that you've researched, or is that?
That's something that we agreed at the last meeting.
Okay, got it. I just couldn't remember that exact point. This is a board workshop. Community members are welcome to join in on the conversation.
Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. Excellent. I think if you were not to include the student reps, you'd be going backwards. Because as you probably are very aware, there's a lot of people that aren't happy with the school board. So we need the input from the students. They're the ones that's in the classroom every day. So they'd be greatly affected by what superintendent you pick. And you keep saying you want to hear from the students and you want other input. So if you didn't, you'd be going backwards. So I would see that as a backwards move, personally, just from a community perspective.
And to extend on that, the average student that starts here from kindergarten and goes to a school district will spend 18,000 hours in a school district. That is not even counting extracurriculars. That is not counting extra events like dances or anything. That is solely, or even things that the school board affects and the district affects. That is solely just off of time in the building.
I would like to, thank you for your comments. I would like to respond by reiterating that our conversation last time was about protection for the students. It wasn't about taking away their voice or not hearing you. It was about what are the social, emotional, and legal impacts on you as minors taking on this big responsibility. Has nothing to do for me with trust. It has nothing to do with silencing young people. It has everything to do with my understanding of processes and creating best practice, especially since we are at the forefront as a district of honoring the work that you do. And so I would say moving forward, I really, really appreciate the work that you did and the research you did. You heard us and you trusted us enough to do that work and to get some information. And I feel a lot like you, Director Greenherron, around I often, become protective before I open my eyes to potential. And I recognize that your voice is powerful and important. I recognize that your voice and those of your predecessors has made a big difference in this work. And we are proud of you at conferences, absolutely. And so I would say, based on what we're talking about now and the way we're talking about it, my only curiosity is, would HYA or any incoming candidates, how would we approach with them that this is a progressive and very important move that we're taking, that our students have an advisory vote? So that would be my next set of curiosities. But I hear you and I respect, what you're saying. And, with that other curiosity I just stated in mind, you're changing my mind.
I would also, I appreciate that perspective. I would also add in that I do think there is a line at which student voice and personnel decisions should not cross. And the question is, where is that line? Because I think that I don't know that it's.
Well, like just for the record, I voted on some very kind of extreme things on this board here. I voted to raise taxes a lot, which, I mean, the community could retaliate with that. I voted on things that directly affect my teachers who teach me every day and have a lot more say over my life than honestly most can do. Teachers can lower my grades, which never teachers would do, but that's a much more consequential thing to our lives than, and we make those decisions out here every board meeting. But where do we draw this line now where it's like the superintendent, is this different or?
I think the part where it's different, and again, I just want clarification on it, it's personnel. That's the difference. The difference is it's somebody's personnel file. It's an offer of employment. It's different. I don't have an issue with it if it's legal, but if it's not legal, then I'm going to say no. And so my question is it legal?
It's perfectly legal for you to take advisory votes from your students, and you can even take it from your constituency. You can take it from, you are getting input throughout this process from every constituent group. The question that you raised last time was, you're also going to have your students involved in, based on what you said last time, in your executive session where you discussed the qualifications of the various finalists. And then you come out here and you provide a vote. So again, typically the way that would work, I've not had the experience with student reps, but typically when a board selects a superintendent, it's a roll call vote and you pick your person. And most often the board is unanimous in its decision. So again, this is the board's choice. There is nothing illegal about accepting an advisory vote from your students. What I have also seen our student reps do of their own volition is abstain when they're uncomfortable. And so they always have that option to abstain, just like any board member. And it's advisory. Now, again, the students are everybody's going to have the experience of having met with the search group, having filled out the survey. Your student reps also are going to have the personal opportunity to give you their opinion in the privacy of an executive session about the qualifications of those people. And I know that that was kind of where the board went last time, was like, well, you'll tell us in exec session and we'll have your opinion. Again, my 2 cents, for as little as it's going to be valued at this important decision, I think they've demonstrated the responsibility as student reps to inform themselves about the qualifications and give you their best advice. And that's all it is. The 5-member board still makes the decision. You may agree with them and you may disagree.
So just a point to the, thank you for laying it out like that. A point alongside that is, as with selecting our search firm, my intent had been to allow a moment for comment from each of the board members, including our student reps, before the roll call vote, just because I think it's important for the community to understand why people are voting as they do. Yeah, so that was just, that would be another opportunity to speak. I do think it is important to recognize that there are some things that it is best to abstain on, whether this is one of them. Probably not in this case, but yeah, because I know that some student reps have abstained previously on things that directly impacted individuals within the district, rather than a group of, like, all of the teachers or all of the classified staff.
It's very rare.
Yeah, it's very rare.
That you
yeah.
won't get consensus around your finalist. It happens, but it's rare. And most new superintendents want a unanimous board. Nobody wants to come into a split board.
Yeah. Do we have any other comments from administrators, community members, folks here? Okay,
Oh,
go ahead.
Okay, I'd also like to just add, if we have any worries about like interviews too, I don't know if we, what's it called? If we'd have to be involved in any of those interviews for that to function.
Absolutely.
But if we're not allowed to be in the main interview, we can always have a separate interview.
No, we
okay.
want you involved in
Main interview?
all the way through the process.
And students have their own session with not only the search consultants with what they're looking for in a superintendent, but there will be focus groups. However you decide that, that's another one of the things that the board has to decide. Is this a 1, 2, or 3-day process? You're going to likely have 3 finalists. The search firm, I believe they sort of started leaning toward it's a 1-day thing with a rotation of candidates, to make it much more compact, because it's really hard to get, if you do 3 nights, to get the same group of people 3 nights in a row, or however you do it. So they're suggesting a 1-day session. So that's another decision that they need an answer to.
So hearing what my fellow board members have said, it does not seem to me like we need to have a motion at the next meeting on this, whether or not to include the student reps as advisory votes. It sounds like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like we are all leaning in that direction.
Yes, and furthermore, I would say I don't think we need to vote on anything, because my read of existing policy would allow this. So we would need to change policy to disallow it.
My only question mark would be for the students, does it feel necessary to you for us to sort of, seal this decision for the record?
I do feel like it might be kind of important to seal it in our current, student representative policy, and say voting, including superintendent searches, which would be a simple kind of edit. I don't know how much goes into that though, but it might be kind of important for future boards to know the expectations when it comes to having superintendent hires.
Are you working on modifications to our, you're working on student voice policy. Never mind, different policy.
Yeah, I was looking this up earlier, but I don't have the number off the top of my head. It would be theoretically a one line edit to that, because it does say advisory vote on all votes, which theoretically includes that. But as you say, it does formalize it for future So,
Might be a good first policy change to tackle if it's a one clause change.
okay. Sorry, I'm just writing a note to myself to make sure that, to remind Christy to get that on there. So we'll add that to our agenda for the next meeting. The next item on here is, I suppose the larger item is the boundaries of the liaison work. The initial and immediate part is the superintendent search survey. I'd like to do the smaller part first, if that's cool with folks. It seems, I don't see a need for a more in-depth survey than the one that they have. I think that plus all the focus group testing will get us a good survey of our community.
Agreed. I recall the benefit of the extended survey would be that it would also like double dip to inform our strategic planning. And my understanding is that will be far enough off that the survey results would probably be invalid by the time we do strategic planning. So I don't see any benefit to do the extended one.
Thoughts from anyone else? Okay, so it seems like the liaisons have guidance on that. And then it's boundaries of decisions that can be made by the two liaisons together on behalf of the board. My suggestion was going to be anything that involves locking down what money is, when money is spent, or who is invited to the table should be a full board decision, but otherwise up to the liaisons. Does that seem like it would cover necessities of the search?
Let's just run that as a filter by some of these open questions. So the finalist schedule that may have a financial impact because of expenses. Background checks is another open thing that will have a financial impact.
Well, my suggested guideline would be if it's increasing the spending, it comes to the board.
Okay.
So if the liaisons want to say we're good with it with the basic, that they could, but if they want to increase the spending, it would come to the board.
Okay, that makes sense.
So we have a budget for this superintendent search that was put in place. What if we simply, if the board is coming within budget, then it doesn't come to the rest of the board. It's only if we exceed that maximum budget.
Otherwise, there's no point in having liaisons. Everything
Right.
costs money. Everything's about,
That,
it all costs
that's a
money.
reasonable suggestion to me as well. Yeah, so as long as it's not including or excluding anyone specifically from the search or going over the budget. Okay,
Thank you.
do you feel like you have necessary
I
guidance
was well
now?
within my realm then.
Yeah,
Can I
thank you.
suggest that when the board liaisons make decisions and provide them to the search consultants, that they share it with the board and
Yes,
superintendent so that we're all on the same page?
I think I would go actually a step beyond that and say, yes, please do email us, but also let's set up a superintendent search liaison report at our business meetings so you can report to the community on decisions you've made, just as part of board reports. Anything else on that? Was there anything else on the superintendent search in general that we needed to discuss? I don't think so.
Well, just the announcements that are out there, then
Yes.
18th and 19th. The night of the 18th is the community forum, but the 18th and 19th are the various constituent groups are meeting with the search consultants, and the board and superintendent are politely disinvited to those events so that the community can freely share their opinion. And those forums include the administrators, students, teachers, PTAs, some that I'm not thinking of, and certainly the open forum for the community in the evening.
Thank you for the summary. I believe that's our business for tonight. Thank you all for attending and
No,
participating.
it isn't.
No, we do have a policy. Sorry, I was looking at an old document. We have a policy.
Everybody was
Policy
hoping you
review,
were right.
sorry.
But the policy actually is quicker than I had anticipated it. So do you want me to just jump in?
Certainly.
Okay. So the policy red line that you have that Christy did is not intended for you to approve. It's just showing you the difference between what your policy is and the recommended one. There are things that you did in this policy that you don't want to undo, I'm sure. The actual impact of the changes in the rules are really about our procedures. And the principals have already changed their handbooks and we've adjusted the procedures. And Mr. Patton is prepared to tell you that summary of the things that we have done to change.
Yeah, so we got OSPI bulletin in mid-August, and so we knew this was coming down the pike. And really what it is it's a lot of change in the verbiage around discipline. Like for an example, Dr. Mocha emailed you, we used to have something called emergency expulsion. Now it's called emergency removal. And really, it's more intentional surrounding restorative conferences, substance evaluations, and so there's some more steps than just suspensions and exclusions. The one thing that really helped clarify for me in my role is discipline has been kind of broken down in two different ways. One is discretionary and one is non-discretionary. So discretionary, basically local control. Individually with students, say it's a tardy, we can do different things with different students, different interventions. And that really is kind of up to us and our student handbook. Non-discretionary is things that you have to follow the RCWs. I think it's RCW 28A 600.015 number 6, I think. And it states basically, those are the things, the state, that you have to do certain actions. Those will be gun on campus, gang activity, selling narcotics, and some of the real extreme things that you have to follow the state guidelines. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, and we're already updated.
And we didn't see anything essential in the changes recommended that would cause us to recommend to the board that you actually change your policy because it's procedural. I don't know if in your review of it, certainly Director Downs, if you see that any differently than I do.
No, and I actually, first off, Principal Patton, you did get the number correct. Good job. It was number 6. Very good. A through D to add to your brain. But no, I think it's interesting how we're kind of going backwards about 6 years in some of the language and the procedures. Just a note, but no, I wouldn't recommend any changes to our policy.
I saw one wording change where it's emergency expulsion that was changed to emergency removal.
Yeah,
And
that would
so,
be one change.
Yeah, in the policy itself. And so,
So we would put it on for you to approve that
right,
for next meeting, but really substantively, that would be the only change.
agreed.
Excellent. I like being ahead of where we need to be on most of this. And thank you for all of the hard work in getting the handbooks up to date with any changes the changes that were necessary. Anything else? Okay, now this time for real. Thank you very much for participation, for attending. Good night. This meeting is adjourned.